Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Martin Dreyfus Show. As you know, we have been taking a lot of time to cover this Ukraine-Russia conflict, kind of just determine ourselves based on a variety of education and what the next steps for the world are. I believe, and Sky pointed out, that the next steps of our education are to kind of understand the history of Ukraine and Russia. And I believe this video is going to do a great job of giving us a more non-politicized, more historical view on this conflict. So let's listen to what this woman has to say. I do not know her name, but she's from Gravitas.
Will Russia go to war with Ukraine? All week, you've heard numerous answers to this question. In Ukraine, 71% of the people believe their country is already at war.
This is 4 days ago. Obviously, there's been a lot to happen in the last 12 hours, let alone 4 days. But again, this is more about history. It's very important.
With Russia. This is a complex crisis, and all the answers are hidden in history. Did you know there was a time when Kiev was more powerful than Moscow? There was also a time when Ukraine and America were adversaries. Tonight, we'll bring you all these stories. We will tell you why Russian President Vladimir Putin is obsessed with Ukraine. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay, and this is Gravitas Plus. We begin.
I feel like there could have been a different word than obsessed.
No, I kind of like it.
He is like the creepy ex-boyfriend, and like he's like, come back to me. Oh, you're not gonna come back to me? This is awful because this is not a joke. But like,
I like the
he is
uses
the like
of
creepy
words
ex-boyfriend.
because it clearly shows this isn't trying to be politicized. They're like, look, man, this is what's going on. This is how we feel about it. Take it how you will. And I think that's needed right now to an extent.
In the 9th century, there was a state called Kievan Rus. This is where it was located. The Slavic people lived here. The city of Kiev was their capital. Between 980 and 1015, the Kievan Rus was ruled by Grand Prince Volodymyr. In Russian,
Keep in mind, that's 100 and... Oh, wait, no, that's only 35 years. I thought it was 135 years. I was mind blown for a second.
his name is Vladimir. In Ukrainian, Volodymyr. And as fate would have it, these are also the names of the presidents of these two countries today. Anyway, Russians, Ukrainians, and Belarusians draw their lineage from this Slavic state. A lot changed in the centuries that followed, and for a lot of it, Ukraine was under Russian rule. In the 1900s, the two were Soviet republics. Russia, the most powerful of the 15 republics, and Ukraine, the second most powerful. It had defense industries, large agricultural lands, and housed much of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. During the Cold War, Ukraine was the arch rival of the United States. The Soviet Union collapsed in 19...
I think that's very interesting because a lot of the world's fears is that Vladimir Putin wants to reunify the Soviet Union, right? That's the idea. Which, honestly, I didn't even know that it was 15 different territories. I really thought the Soviet Union was Russia and that it kind of just had a rebranding, if you will. Clearly, I was wrong. It's not surprising that Ukraine used to be an adversary to America. I mean, that's pretty logical. We've been at war with Russia and their people for literally hundreds of years, so that's not all that surprising. But I didn't know the Soviet Union was multiple territories, so I kind of want to point that out.
1991, Ukraine became independent, as did Russia. Ukraine inherited much of Soviet nuclear arsenal, but gave it up to Russia in 1994. In exchange,
Wow.
Moscow guaranteed Ukraine's security and promised to respect its sovereignty. They signed the Budapest Memorandum along with these countries. Cut to November 2013, Viktor Yanukovych was the president of Ukraine. He had a reputation for heavy-handedness, corruption, and above all, for being openly pro-Moscow. In 2013, he rejected an EU trade deal. This deal could have meant greater integration with the European Union. Instead, Yanukovych decided to take a $15 billion bailout from Russia. To many...
That's interesting. Because if he's been in control of Ukraine, like in 2013, for example, that's 8 years ago. It's about 8 years ago. It was 2013. And that's when Putin is claiming all these issues kind of arised. It's also interesting that they legit signed a deal to take all their weapons.
To take all their weapons, and as in return, Moscow will protect you. Moscow's gonna grant you protection. We're gonna do what we can to protect you. And now Russia's invading Ukraine.
Well, so before she
After taking all their weapons.
Before she continues, I mean, it seems like they were obviously one country. They were one, not even a country. They were just a unified conglomerate of countries fighting as one. Then it goes back to Russia. Ukraine's part of Russia, but they're not really, they're like, don't really want to be a part of you. We feel like we were a powerful enough territory to be ourselves. So they became themselves. Once they became themselves, however, it's almost like they instantly surrendered back to like, kind of like Cuba is to America. Like if someone fucked with Cuba right now, America would blow them to smithereens. Kind of the same relationship. So then it makes sense that this previous president was pro-Moscow. I mean, it seems like him being pro-Moscow is what held the relationship together for the past 20 years, to be honest with you. And then this new president came in. He's like, wait a minute. We want to be a democracy. We want to do things the way the Western world does it, if you will. And so he's been signing EU trade deals and been separating from Russia, it seems like. And I feel like that's probably played a significant impact on Russia's life, on their infrastructure, on their economy, amongst other things, because they were the second biggest producing city in all of their country.
I think I read, like, Ukraine and Russia put out a quarter of the world's wheat, like, production.
I think that's what he was talking about.
It's a quarter, like, together, Russia and Ukraine.
Like 25%.
Yeah. And that's a fucking lot. Like, a quarter?
Of
like,
bread.
that's a lot.
It's insane.
Wheat's in so much shit.
So,
like, it's...
I don't think you can blindly say Russia's unjustified. Because I also don't know the fine print to that deal. What else was in that deal? They gave up their weapons, but did they also, like, sign economic deals that they've gone back on? I don't know. Maybe they haven't. Maybe it's unjustified, as many people have pointed out. But this clearly is deeper than we're being led to believe.
Many Ukrainians, it felt like being sold to Moscow. So protests broke out. They were called Euromaidan. Euro because these protests were about Europe, and Maidan because they happened in Kiev's Maidan, what we today know as the Independence Square. Here, protesters chanted, "Sign the EU deal, Yanukovych must step down." Russia supported the president, the West supported the protesters. In February 2014, Yanukovych's government was toppled, the president was driven out of Ukraine, he fled to Russia. Not every Ukrainian was happy with this.
So, there's division in Ukraine itself already. There's been division in Ukraine on what side of the fence they should reside.
Many in the Russian-speaking East wanted Yanukovych to stay. When he was driven out, the minority felt disenfranchised. On the other side of the border, Russia was angry it had lost its puppet. To salvage the situation, Moscow annexed Crimea. Why Crimea? Well, let's now zoom into this part of the world. Crimea is a peninsula. It is located in the Black Sea. In 1954, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev transferred Crimea. It was given to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic from the Russian Soviet Socialist Republic. Why? Khrushchev hoped the transfer would strengthen, quote-unquote, brotherly ties between the Ukrainian and Russian people.
So, it seems as though that before this president was driven out, that they had a very good relationship and that they helped each other, at least politically. The deeper aspect of that is the amount of people that actually agree with the politics in their country is very minimal. But I believe that's taken place throughout the world right now. Yeah. And it's kind of left the citizens of the world to be at the mercy of the leaders of the country. But it doesn't sound like this is a completely unprovoked invasion. Doesn't. But she'll continue to enlighten us.
Both Russia and Crimea were part of the Soviet Union. So this transfer did not mean very much. When Ukraine became independent in 1991, Crimea joined it. The peninsula was given special autonomy. It remained home to Russian military bases. Moscow promised to respect Crimean autonomy. Many in Russia were of the opinion that Crimea should not have been allowed to join Ukraine. In 2014, when Yanukovych was ousted from power in Ukraine, Russian military began seizing government buildings in Crimea. Soon the entire peninsula was under military occupation. A referendum followed. On the 16th of March 2014, Crimeans voted to become a part of Russia. Was this vote legitimate?
Oh.
Well, it depends on who you ask. For Putin, this was Crimea's liberation. For the rest of the world, this was Crimea's annexation.
How about forget what the world and Putin thinks? What did Crimea think?
Mm-hmm.
Did their people genuinely vote to become part of Russia? Because if they did, I don't give a damn what Barack Obama thinks. I don't give a damn what Vladimir Putin thinks. They chose to go back to Russia. That's what their people wanted for their territory. It also seems as though in 2013, 2014, Russia started taking its territory back 7 years ago now. 7, 8 years ago now. Because they were occupying government buildings there. So, if, which that seems like it could be a big if, but if that vote's legit, I'll send you to what I just said. I don't care what anyone thought. They chose to rejoin Russia. That's what they wanted to do. And if they wanted to do that, they should have been allowed to do that. No?
Yeah, but I think it was not legitimate. And I think that's what she said.
Well, she said that if you ask Putin, it's legitimate, and if you ask the rest of the world, it's not legitimate. But again, neither of those opinions are the opinions of the people.
I get that, but
If
I don't think it would. You could say the world against Putin and have the people there not agree with it when they're still a part of the world.
I mean, I think we should Google it. The official result from the Autonomous Republic of Crimea was a 97% vote of integration of the region of the Russian Federation, with an 83% voter turnout. Within the local government of Sevastopol, there was a 97% vote for the region into the Russian Empire, with an 89% voter participation. So, according to statistics, Crimea wants to be a part of Russia. Over 80% of people in the area voted, and over 97% of those people voted to join Russia.
Yeah, that is Wikipedia though.
I mean, I don't
know. It's hard for me to read articles and still know like for sure. Like, I feel like there is no really way for us to know for sure.
Constitution. Voters in Ukraine opted to join Russia in a referendum Moscow called the starting point for determining the future of the peninsula. Said the March 16 vote violates both the Ukraine Constitution and general principles of international law, which respect the territorial integrity of states. So what they're saying is illegitimate about it, if I'm not mistaken, is that they gave the city of Crimea a vote against the Ukrainian government's will. However, what that doesn't mean is that the vote is illegitimate.
Yeah.
And if the vote's not illegitimate, Cuba votes all the time to join America, guys. They just don't vote to do it. I don't know that that's wrong.
The focus then shifted to eastern Ukraine. where Russia-backed separatists had seized territory. Ukrainian forces did not launch an all-out offensive at first, but on the 17th of July 2014, when a flight carrying 298 people was shot down by these rebels, Ukrainian forces decided to flush out the rebels. The separatists began losing ground, so the Russian army stepped in. They invaded eastern Ukraine and fought alongside the rebels. What followed was a series of talks between Russia, Ukraine, and the West. They resulted in the Minsk Accords. This was first signed in 2014. Both sides agreed on ceasefire and military withdrawal. Ukraine agreed to hold elections in the rebel-held areas. 8 years on, the Minsk Accords remain unimplemented.
Well, that's interesting too. The fact that that agreement has not at all stood, and that would be Russia's justification right there. Ukraine hasn't instilled elections in its rebel cities, and so Ukraine is justifying itself in a very gray area that I'm going to just call bullshit. They have rebel forces that are fighting in Russia constantly, and they're just saying they're rebel forces, that they're not a part of Ukraine. But it's your country and it's your people, and it's your job to hold that under control. And you're not. And it's affecting now for, seems like 8 years, it seems like your rebel forces have been killing Russian military people in Russia. If that's true, man, I hate how hard everything is to know for a fact. But if the truth is that for the past 8 years, Ukrainian militias have been launching attacks, full force offensive attacks, in her words, against Russia, there is justification. If it's not true, well then, that's a whole nother story. But this lady doesn't seem like she's on either side. It does seem like she's just laying out the history.
Ukraine stands as the largest European country excluding Russia. It covers an area of more than 600,000 square kilometers with a population of 44 million and a GDP of more than $155 billion.
Sorry.
Per capita income, more than $3,700. Today, Ukraine is divided between East and West in more ways than one. The West sees itself as more European. The East is closer to Russia, be it in terms of geography or sentiment. In the West, most Ukrainians speak Ukrainian. In the East, a third are native Russians. In the West, Russia is looked at with suspicion. In the East, Russia is looked at through the lens of shared history and heritage. Ukraine also remains at war. Its forces are fighting the rebels in the East. Rebel leaders are ruling at least 2 regions, Donetsk and Luhansk. Together, they're known as the Donbas region. Russia has once again sent its troops. This time, they're stationed right at the border. What does Vladimir Putin want? For NATO to stop expanding. NATO stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's a military alliance. These countries...
Before she continues, because I really want to hear what she's about to say. Civil war in Ukraine? This whole time, right? That's what she just outlined to me.
Yeah.
So, what it sounds like to me, what we're being fed as Americans and as a Western civilization, is again that Russia is a demon, Russia is wrong, and how dare Russia do anything because they're Russia. When it seems like reality, for 8 years, there have been forces in Ukraine that have been attacking Russians constantly. It seems like there's a solid, maybe not a majority, but a solid percentage of Ukrainians who would prefer to be a part of Russia than to be a part of Ukraine. And with that being said, did or did not France back the United States during our revolution? Look at things from 2 sides. Hold multiple perspectives. We were built to be told that democracy is the only way to rule your world and that communism is the worst thing ever. China is the most fast-growing economy and is about to be the most powerful country in the world. They're not democratic. In fact, America's most successful times, as outlined by a few experts, was a democratic socialist time, not a democratic capitalist time. That debate is long and harsh between countries, between leaders, and between perspectives. And by just choosing to look at one side of that perspective, you're limiting your view of what's going on in the world. From Russians' perspective, for 8 years they've been being attacked, it seems like. For 8 years they have a percentage of people in Ukraine who side with them and want their help and want their country to be a part of Russia. I mean, Crimea voted to go back. It's not an illegitimate vote. Maybe the way it was conducted was a little fishy. Maybe it should have never been done. But the vote happened, and they voted to go back. So, before we all stand here and say Putin is the worst human being ever for doing what he's doing, maybe we're in the wrong. Maybe we're not. And maybe it's just none of our goddamn business. But I'm really curious what she has to say about NATO and how that affects Russia. Because, just to recap, because I talked for a minute or two there, she just said that what Vladimir Putin wants and why he wants Ukraine is because he wants to stop the expansion in NATO, the North Atlantic Trade something?
Countries are the founding members of NATO. These countries joined it during the Cold War, and these countries joined after it. Ukraine.
So every country that has ever opposed Russia ever is in this treaty. Keep that in mind.
Wants to join NATO too, but Putin wants NATO to exclude Ukraine and every former Soviet state. And this is just half the story. Like I said, a lot is hidden in history. For starters, there is domestic politics. When Putin annexed Crimea, his approval rating skyrocketed. Keeping the nationalistic drum rolling helps the Russian president. Annexing parts of Ukraine also helps Putin restore Russia's superpower image. Again, back to history. Many Russians view Ukraine's independence as a mistake. It is true that Ukraine was ruled by Russia. In fact, Ukraine has barely remained independent pre-1991. There was a brief period before World War I, and then another stint in 1600. For the rest of its modern...
So again, as I've told you 10,000 times, Ukraine is a 30-year-old country, everybody. In 1812, which is 36 years after America's freedom, who came knocking back on our door? Who came back sending bombs, blowing shit up, killing people? Britain came right back, guys. Britain wanted its territory back. Britain wanted its resources, its economy. Britain was the world's superpower. It colonized the entire world. They came back 36 years later. 1991 to 2022 is 31 years. Of course they want their stuff back.
In history, Ukraine was under Russia. 1 in 6 Ukrainians is an ethnic Russian. 1 in 3 speaks Russian as a native language. So Putin is right when he says historically they were one. But claiming Ukraine on the basis of colonial history is wrong. It will be like Britain claiming India or South Africa or Spain claiming the Philippines. Past imperialism cannot justify present-day expansionism. Here's what else history tells us. Ukraine was forcefully Russified. Cut to 1700, Russian leader Catherine the Great started Russifying Ukraine. Ethnic Russians were shipped to this part of the world. Schools were told to teach Russian language. By 1800, the Ukrainian language was banned. In 1930, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin steered a famine in Ukraine. Millions of Eastern Ukrainians were killed. The area was then repopulated with ethnic Russians. In the 1940s, the ethnic Tatars were relocated. They too were replaced with Russians. There is a reason why Eastern Ukraine today has so many native Russian speakers. It was designed to be that way. Eastern Ukraine was always dear to Russia. It has coal, it has iron, fertile land. Its historical connection with Russia was forced. Putin time and again talks about the Holy Rus. He says Russians and Ukrainians are one people.
That was so much information. Joseph
That was so
Stalin led
a famine.
a directed famine in the 40s to wipe out a large portion of Ukraine. This is deeper than we make it. I mean, was Ukraine ever really a country? I don't know. Every time it seems that Ukraine has become a country, it seems that both a leader and or the people want to go back to Russia to an extent enough that Russia then makes a devastating attack to do what it wants to do before then the other people cycle back through to become free for 30 years. And I mean, on a surface level, of course we feel bad for Ukrainians. And I mean, as a human being, how can you not? They're getting bombed. They're getting murdered. From a historical lens, I don't know who the hell to side with. This is just a total shit show created by these two countries, and now the world's going to pay the price for it.
70% Ukrainians reject this thought. 72% consider Russia a hostile state. Today, 33.3% Ukrainians are ready to take up arms against Russia. 21.7% are ready to stage a civil resistance against Russia. 67% Ukrainians want to join the EU. 59% want to join the NATO. Meet the current Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky. He came to power in 2019 following a landslide victory. He is a vocal critic of Russia. Zelensky openly opposes Russian occupation of eastern Ukraine. 73% of Ukrainian voters voted this man to power. Today, Volodymyr Zelensky represents the pulse of Ukraine, the Ukraine that wants to remain independent of Russia. But Vladimir Putin wants to become the man who revived Russian imperialism. He does not realize the world has moved on.
That's kind of true and kind of not true. The world can want to move on as much as it wants. As long as there are bombs and bullets in this world, we can't move on. Shout out to that chick. I mean, that was a ton of information in 9 minutes and 25 seconds, and I learned more from her right there than I've learned in
the 30 videos we've watched
in
from
the
American
4
reporters.
hours that we've been researching.
More than 4 hours we've been doing
all
this
day.
since we woke up at 12. It's now 8 o'clock. We learned more from that than any fucking BBC News, CNN News.
I still, with all that objective news, I believe that helps start to really form an objective opinion for ourselves. When you look at a 73 to 27% difference, that reminds me of Biden versus Trump in a lot of ways, as though that ended. 73% of our country wants to move in this democratic, buddy-buddy, hand-in-hand way, which is a beautiful thing in my opinion, but that's a debate for another day. 27% of the country, just to use their numbers and kind of just draw lines of comparison, wanted to keep Donald Trump elected, enjoyed the kind of anger that fostered in our country. They kind of thrived on it, if you will. And in our own country, we condemned those people. We didn't want them to speak for the rest of our country. So if I can apply that lens to Ukraine, that means the majority, a strong majority, doesn't want Eastern Ukraine to speak for their country. And with that being said, they're right to fight for what they believe in, and they should fight for what they believe in. Opposingly, Russia has a right to fight for their country too. If for 8 years, Ukrainian forces has been fighting and killing ethnic Russians and Russian people and launching offensive attacks on that border, that is a danger to Russia. And if a portion of those people want to be a part of Russia, Vladimir Putin is justified in saying he's liberating Russia, because the people he is fighting for, he is liberating. He's not fighting for the people we're fighting for. from my perspective, sitting on my couch in Phoenix, Arizona, looking at my pool overlooking the city, trying to pray to God that we can stay in a state of peace, I'm going to stick with the same sentiment. It's not our problem. It's not America's problem. It's not the UK's problem. It's not Germany's problem. It's not Italy's problem. It's not China's problem. It's not between us. The history's too deep. Would you step in between me and my cousin and our long-standing issues? No, you don't know enough about it. Why should we do that with Russia and Ukraine? Because all that's going to do is piss off Vladimir Putin, who is a world superpower, and cause more issues. I think the next thing I kind of want to view, though, baby, is... I mean, I saw those videos of Russian troops abandoning. We see the videos of Russian protests going on right now. I think I want a more on-the-ground Russian perspective. I think is what we need to go into next. Shout out to Gravitas. Thank you for watching that video with us. I recommend, and I am definitely going to take the time to continue to watch some of these videos, because
It's nicer to have somebody else's country's perspective.
yeah, that was
America's.
very useful. Very useful.